Kia ora koutou. It has been a year of uncertain times. Kia ora everybody. It's been a year of uncertain times, and I'm really delighted to introduce a friend of mine, Dr. Sydney Shep, who I've known for about 30 years, but we wouldn't like to go into too much detail about exactly how long. But Sydney's a reader in book history and a printer at the Wai-te-ata Press and at Victorian University, and I believe she has got an absolutely fabulous presentation for you this afternoon on times uncertain. So thank you.
Kia ora, welcome, bonjour. Yes, we will, after the presentation, we'll tell you a few lies about Toronto and Massey College, but maybe not before. But it's a delight to be here. And I hope to free range through what I'm calling a typographical journey through how the design profession has reacted to the COVID issue. And hopefully the tech will work and we'll have some few entertainments along the way. Thank you, Fab. But I'd really like to dedicate this talk to all the health professionals. They've helped me in my life and they're helping everybody every single moment of the day around the world. And I think this will give some inspiration to all of you as we deal with these uncertain times. So it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. With these words, Charles Dickens opens his novel Hard Times, a damning expose of the personal and social costs of 19th century industrialization. Fast forward to 2020. How many messages did you receive that describe the COVID-19 situation as strange, unsettling, challenging, uncertain? How many of you found comfort in lockdown by slowing down, appreciating time with family, reconnecting with past selves and manual skills, hearing the world retune as quiet and birdsong repopulated the airwaves? How many of you turned to baking, to gardening, reading, sharing the daily quiz with Whānau, keeping in virtual touch through social media and the ubiquitous Zoom? How many of you were or knew essential workers who held the country together? Friends or family whose jobs were on the line, colleagues who were scrambling to deliver meaningful experiences in the online environment to students who we knew were as hungry as ever for knowledge and who too were adjusting to this brave new world? How many of you knew families concerned about food security, access to health services, and family violence? As we process the barrage of daily media updates, statistics from here and from around the world, political posturing, conspiracy theories, and rampant incompetence, it frequently became too much. Survival was reliant on filtering, absorbing information at a human scale, thinking through action one slow step at a time. And you were not alone. Graphic designers were thoroughly implicated in this necessary process of recalibration. So today I'm going to share some examples of how the design community responded to the pandemic and how, in particular, the development of a new typeface captured the anxiety, the pain, and the new global realities of COVID-19. Let's start with a salient experience, a moment in the pandemic. Think back to the first time you heard social distancing. It sounds sort of odd to you, like we were all walking contagions, which technically we could have been, and distance was as much a calibrated and calculated measurement as a networked community reality. And then when did the rhetoric shift to physical distancing? On 20 March 2020, the World Health Organization changed its tune and the world followed suit. They noted that while maintaining a physical distance was absolutely necessary amid the global pandemic, quote, it does not mean that socially we have to disconnect from our loved ones, from our family. Technology right now has advanced so greatly we can keep connected in many ways without actually physically being in the same room or physically being in the same space with people. We're changing to say physical distance, and that's on purpose because we want people to still remain connected. Suddenly, people realized that isolation impacted on well-being, and concerns about short and long-term impacts on mental health were being identified. Jeremy Fries, professor of sociology at Stanford University, told Al Jazeera, the quote, Social distancing makes it sound like people should stop communicating with each other, while instead we should be preserving as much community as we can, even while we keep our physical distance from one another. We need to do physical distancing, yes, to protect everyone's physical well-being, but mental well-being is obviously also important, and social isolation is not good for mental well-being. Technology was touted as the answer, of course, but it also created its own set of problems, divisions, exclusions, and inequalities. In March 2020, Google released its COVID-19 related font awesome icons, a symbol set that enabled websites to communicate clearly to visitors and customers the all-important message about vital hygiene and social distancing. It proudly announced 43 freely available, 144 in the Pro set for sale, of course. The New Zealand government's campaign took a similar but different approach, using its flexible icon repertoire to make messages meaningful, succinct, and clear. The simple color palette and hazard stripes made the COVID message stand out in a sea of words and images. We didn't need font awesome or the corporate baggage that went with it, but more on that later. Almost simultaneously, the multinational machines revved up. Audi and Volkswagen retooled their iconic icons to reflect physical distancing. Even those restrictions during lockdown and the steep fall in petrol prices meant those objects of social mobility and prestige could only sustain their symbolic capital through online brand promotion. And if the link works, we'll have a little video demo. Ooh, 2 tabs. This one. This one. Close.
Close, yeah.
All right.
Let's try again.
No, that's fine. It's done.
Sure.
Now, when McDonald's entered the empathy game, the maneuver totally backfired. The Brazil-based social media accounts shared an ad created by local design agency DPZ&T. It was meant to convey the message, separated for a moment, so that we can always be together. Twitter exploded. Replies included, upset someone thought about it, upset someone approved it, upset someone bought it. Or, this took me a minute to get. I know, all caps, the average American is not getting this. Or another one, 25 years in advertising, this is garbage. And to add insult to injury, someone posted a photo of Trump eating McDonald's fries on Air Force One in the context of McDonald's lobbying against a US coronavirus relief bill that would force restaurants to pay workers sick leave. They eventually backed down and accepted the inevitable, less because of a concern for their workforce than consumer outrage resulting in potential loss of their fast food market share. Evan Nicole Brown of Fast Company explained it this way, quote, clever marketing or tasteless gesture. Consumers aren't looking for marketing gimmicks. They want to see companies support workers and help fight against the virus. The presumptive purpose of these revamped logos is to raise awareness about social distancing. But how many people are really going to take public health advice from a car company or a fast food chain? Designing physical distance into these logos unintentionally reawakened the social contexts that informed positionality, our place in the world. At a time of unprecedented crisis, social and ethical responsibility reasserted itself and collapsed the distance between the physical and the social. I get it. Brands want to stay relevant at a time when pretty much no one wants to buy a new car or a Big Mac. But a quick Photoshop job isn't the solution. Brands will have to be more creative and more sensitive if they want to lure customers at a time when pay cuts are abundant and patience runs thin. If corporate logos became the object of internet scorn, how did typefaces or fonts fare? Kentucky-based Cornet Design Agency produced what they described as a dignified serif for the coronavirus age, lends attractive gravitas to the hollowest of slogans and integrity to self-serving platitudes in these uncertain times. I must admit, it took me a while to get it. Was it the iconic Superman logo, superimposed and stylized over classic letterforms? By rejigging a 19th century ornamented type aesthetic, was it really dignified, possessed of gravitas and integrity, capable of countering the inane platitudes of the new normal? Was it the agency's answer to the UN's March 2020 call to the creative community to develop engaging content around the WHO and UN's 6 priority areas? Finally, aha, or duh, it's a mask. But doesn't that seem a little bit ironic? A font that's meant to communicate covers its own identity and becomes, in effect, faceless? I began to think this swipe at Hannibal Lecter was a sight gag, especially when scrolling down the site, we get an endorsement from Dr. Anthony Fauci. This is great. I'm going to keep pushing for more fonts to do the same thing. The same what, you might ask. Now, if we do a little nimble cross. It's not dragging across. Yes, it does. My handy co-director here. Look at this. Okay, beautiful. All right, so we'll just have a little web tour here. So we've seen that. You can download, you can have a sample. The quick brown dog jumped over the quarantine dog, got it. The alphabet set, oh, there's the doctor, there we go. Looking like a doctor. Yes, not as many gray hairs as he's got now. Try the font for yourself, look at that. You could type here, and uplifting sentiments. Can you actually read them? Now more than ever, we're in this together in these uncertain times. We still find ways to stay close, even when we're apart. We are here for you, right? It works. In 1930, typographer, type critic, and design historian Beatrice Ward delivered her now famous lecture entitled The Crystal Goblet, or Printing Should Be Invisible, to a packed male-only audience of the British Typographers Guild at St. Bride Institute, London. She opened with, imagine you have before you a flagon of wine. You may choose your own favorite vintage for this imaginary demonstration, so that it be deep, shimmering crimson in color. You have 2 goblets before you. One is of solid gold, wrought in the most exquisite patterns. The other is crystal clear glass, thin as a bubble and as transparent. Pour and drink. And according to your goblet of choice, I shall know whether or not you are a connoisseur of wine. For if you have no feelings about wine one way or another, you will want the sensation of drinking the stuff out of a vessel that may have cost thousands of pounds. But if you are a member of that vanishing tribe, the amateurs, the lovers of fine vintages, you will choose the crystal, because everything about it is calculated to reveal rather than hide the beautiful thing it was meant to contain. Ward went on to reflect on the science of typography, or the art of disposing type on the page, and the necessity for readability and legibility. Like the crystal goblet, good design enables us to see beyond the individual letter forms to the rich, fragrant, unadulterated content of the font. The most important thing about printing, she said, is that it conveys thought, ideas, images from one mind to other minds. And to do this, she claimed, we need transparent or invisible typography. So let's return to the original type from which Cornet devised their uncertain times, that mad masked font. How many of you are up close and personal with Times New Roman? It used to be Microsoft's default font, and it's still required today for essays, grant applications, and official documentation. Why, you may ask? Well, let me tell you a story. The subtext is a tale of authority and power, permanence and change, brand identity, and consumer liquidity. Once upon a time, there was a newspaper. First published on 1 January 1785, the London Times was the de facto voice of the establishment and became the British newspaper of choice for conservative politicians and their publics. The royal crest is just not there for decoration. Like many newspapers, it suffered its ups and downs and went through a series of notable owners: Alfred Harmsworth, John Jacob Astor, Roy Thompson, Rupert Murdoch, amongst others, each responding to and helping to shape the visual culture of their respective era. By the 1930s, the newspaper was ready for a major facelift. And after airing some pretty scathing remarks about the paper's antiquated typography, Stanley Morrison, a colleague of Beatrice Ward's at the Monotype Corporation, was commissioned to redesign the original Times font. Morrison's brief was simple, but compelling. Keep the classic serif look and feel. Increase the readability. Economize on space by packing more text in the same page real estate. He experimented with historic faces such as Baskerville and Plantin, as well as recent arrivals, Imprint, Ionic, and Perpetua. And finally, working with the Times advertising draftsman, Victor Lardent, he took the best elements from Plantin, freshened up the serifs, increased the X height, refined the spacing for better legibility, and produced a range of sizes from 5.5 to 9 point. The newspaper in its new livery was launched on 3 October 1932. A significant talking point was the effect of using higher grade newsprint than most newspapers. The better, whiter paper enhanced the new typeface's degree of contrast and sharp serifs and created a sparkling, modern look. The font was subsequently released for commercial distribution a year later and became the most widely used visual communication tool of the 20th century. With the shift to new production methods in 1972 and the smaller tabloid format in 2004, the newspaper went through 5 subsequent iterations, all of which were based on Morrison's Times New Roman, Times Europa, Times Roman, Times Millennium, Times Classic, and today, Times Modern. Despite the ubiquity of Times, the font can still pack a punch. Founded in 1851 with its black letter masthead evoking tradition, power, and authority, the New York Times retains the original Times New Roman font for its text. This animated story, no wonder the frontage was repurposed on 24 May 2020 to signal the stark reality of 100,000 COVID deaths. 1,000 names with snippets of personal remembrances. The rest was a potent visual silence that echoes today, with 6.38 million confirmed cases and almost 192,000 deaths. And at this point, I'd like to pause to acknowledge 9/11 and the ongoing tragedy that sparked the Black Lives Matter movement. In the age of coronavirus, Times New Roman became the basis of another COVID-inspired design. This time not uncertain times, but times uncertain. The Third Street attention agency like Cornet wanted to create a font that expresses our contemporary condition and exposes the gratuitousness of everyday advertising. As Chief Creative Officer David Jones explained, quote, "We have clients that are all pivoting and adapting in the current climate. I know each brand and the agency behind them mean well, and these are without a doubt uncertain times. But when we heard that phrase repeated over and over and over in brand messages, it just got ridiculous, especially when it came from brands that I don't have that strong a relationship with, such as the local auto lube shop." So we're just going to do a bit of web tour for this one. Introducing Times Uncertain. The quick brown fox just kept avoiding the damn lazy dog. The version of the classical font, but more distressed. Uses extra wide spacing for better social distancing. Keep 6 feet back. And the only punctuation. Forget about colons and semicolons. Inconsistent sizing that reflects our mood when we read the daily news. And there you go, in these uncertain times, all of us here at the Schaumburg, Illinois Quickie Auto Lube want you to know that we are here for you. You too can download the font. So, what do you think? Are they successful? Let's just click that guy off. Taking a leaf out of the Canadian communication guru Marshall McLuhan, does the medium actually suit the message? I don't know about you, but it's legible. But the font makes me sort of slightly queasy, a bit uneasy, a bit anxious, if not unhinged. The baseline, which usually grounds the reader, is warped. The lowercase and capitals are mixed up. Ascenders and descenders follow no typographic logic. The distress look is often used by designers to evoke nostalgia and the patina of age, but in this context, it's spooky, it's eerie, it's uncanny, as if the world as we know it is gradually being eroded, fragmented, eaten away. And presciently, the font visually encapsulated. It's what epidemiologists have now discovered. COVID-19 strikes at the very heart of our anatomy, rendering our lungs and our other organs unrecognizable, unreadable, illegible. If type expresses emotion, Times Uncertain captures the affective power of print. Bruce Woodward, who created the font's landing page, noted, "Things right now aren't that funny, but having a laugh about the language we use to describe it is a bit of cathartic fun." And exposing those conflicting emotions through a redesigned classic typeface joins a new COVID lexicon. Sani for hand sanitizer, Rona for coronavirus, Magpie, repurposed originally for toilet paper and then later for webcams, and then Corona Nennials, or bubble babies. Watch out, November. And a new way of saying goodbye. Be safe, be kind. Over a decade ago, a survey conducted by Anthony Callahan was sent to over 100 designers, asking them to name the font they used the most, the ones they believed were the most highly visible, and the ones they liked the least. The results were hardly surprising. The top 10 fonts that you'll see here were Frutiger, Helvetica, Futura, Gilsons, Univers, Garamond, Bemba, Minion, and Arial. And the most visible fonts, Helvetica, Meta, well, Futura is there, but Times New Roman also was 8th equal. But interestingly enough, the same Times New Roman appeared in the lineup of the least favorite fonts, along with Helvetica, brush script, Arial and Courier, Roti and Souvenir, grunge fonts, avant-garde and Gil Sans, and of course that great type abomination, courtesy of Microsoft, by the way, Comic Sans. Ugh. Poor Helvetica, the only typeface that inspired a movie. Poor Times New Roman, a typeface with a long and auspicious history. No wonder Microsoft commissioned a new font in 2007 from leading Dutch type designer Lucas de Groot. Any idea what it's called? I'm sure you all use it. Boom. Calibri is a modern sans serif family with subtle roundings on stems and corners. It features real italics, small caps, and multiple numeral sets. Its proportions allow high impact in tightly set lines of big and small text alike. Calibri's many curves and the new rasterizer team up in bigger sizes to create and reveal a warm and soft character. Let's dwell a bit on this description, a warm and soft character. A family of type is traditionally called a font, F-O-N-T, or if you're in the UK and Canada, F-O-U-N-T font. And each individual piece of metal or photographic emulsion or pixel is called a sort, representing a particular linguistic, pictographic, or ideographic character. When Apple personal computers were introduced, users for the first time could select their own types without running interference from designers. They could shape language the way that they wanted. They could capture on the page or on the screen the way they really felt. Fonts then became known as typefaces, faces for short. There's a common theme running through this lexicon. The anthropomorphic language of type is the language of the Anthropocene, embodying human personalities, types or characters, and the face or faces they show to the world. Font selection involves matching the typeface with the specific emotion. A communication message, whatever it is meant to convey that emotion. Scripting, an affective response. Often acting subliminally, like Beatrice Ward's invisible typography, type can also shout, cry, scream, sing. Ward's contemporary counterfoil, Jan Tieschold, began his career with the Bauhaus and typographic modernism, where the asymmetrical geometry of the letterforms was the message. During World War II, he escaped Germany and moved to England to become Penguin's leading book designer, invented the so-called tri-band cover, adopted more conservative approaches, yet remained wedded to the geometry of classic sans serif fonts like Gill. The analysis of type falls under the field of social semiotics that investigates human signifying practices in specific social and cultural circumstances, and which tries to explain meaning making as a social practice. Originally focused on speech and text, social semiotics is now multimodal, encompassing image, gesture, posture, gaze, action, music, color, even 3D objects. It's also reached into the world of geosemiotics or place-based sign systems. And as such, it registers the power dynamics of the social in the everyday life. Take, for example, a commentary on the Christchurch shootings. Pre-COVID, Glenmore Street, Wellington, looked like this. Post-COVID, looked like this. This footnote to history sparks new conjunctions, new affective responses, new stories, all mediated through type. So much so that these photographic images have now been archived by Kaupapa. New Zealand's official COVID visual strategy diverged from the government's usual font palette of Fura Sans, Helvetica, Arial, and sans serif, but it maintained the spirit of the Ministry of Health's guidelines dated 24 August 2018. Use plain sans serif fonts. That means a font without serifs or small lines attached to the bottom of letters or symbols. Use plain fonts such as Arial, Tahomo, or Calibri. Graphic designers working with the government's communications and public engagement team of the COVID-19 all-of-government response team in the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet selected Omnes for print material and Baloo 2 for their web content. I often wonder if they sought out fonts that mirrored the well-being auras of Jacinda and Ashley. Like Calibri, Omnis has liquid curvy lines that soften the edge of the message, yet remain legible and accessible. Developed by Brooklyn-based Joshua Darden, the first African-American font designer, it has been used for everything from crayon advertising to the cover of a tennis magazine, from eye drops to electricity, and from snacks to cannabis to healthy eating campaigns. It remains Darden Studios' most famous and popular typeface. Baloo 2, by Ektype, a collective of type designers based in Mumbai, is an affable display face described as, quote, a perfect blend of pointy paws in a coat of fur, unquote. Riffing, of course, on the sloth bear from Kipling's Jungle Book, immortalized by Disney Studios in 1967 and nominated for the Kids' Choice Award for the Most Wanted Pet. Both Omnis and Baloo 2 have a freshness and friendliness that, when coupled with clean graphics, make the COVID comms messages convincing without being prescriptive. This was the key to the success of the COVID campaign. As Katie Brown, digital communications lead for Unite Against COVID-19, observed, quote, the scare tactics and negative messaging used elsewhere in the world just wouldn't work here. As a competitive nation, we pulled together, achieved much, and nailed sort of COVID, unquote. Trust was built as much through the message as the medium, both targeting and dynamically responsive to the diverse publics of Aotearoa who needed to know how to live, who called the government out, and whose own words, concerns, and stories were continuously and iteratively repurposed throughout the campaign. Josh Warren White of the Oakland-based Design Action Collective that came up with the visual identity for the Black Lives Matter global social justice movement said, as designers, we create the logos, but it's the social movements that create the brand. Impact, therefore, resides in what you do with the fonts, where you place them, who's your poster boy, how your audience is invited to participate in the co-design, the message. Canadian typographer, poet, and illustrator and translator Robert Bringhurst puts it this way, quote, in a badly designed book, letters mill and stand like starving horses in their field. In a book designed by rote, they sit like stale bread and mutton on the page. In a well-made book where designer, compositor, and printer have all done their jobs, no matter how many thousands of lines and pages, the letters are alive. They dance in their seats. Sometimes they rise and dance in the margins and the aisles. Our team of 5 million needs to applaud our team of 26 letters, New Zealand's particular COVID brand, and the designers who brought those voices to life in the midst of uncertainty and grief. So to conclude, literary scholar Stephen O'Connor places enchantment at the forefront of material culture. In Paraphernalia, The Curious Lives of Magical Things, he offers a forensic analysis of personal material engagements with things that impart what he calls the shock of the newly old. As he remarks, such new old things inhabit space, are a kind of temporizing with it, a refracting of the white noon of the now into the chronic rainbow of the times, with their twilight tints and hues. Such things hum with hint and import because they are there without being fully present, to hand, but not exactly here and now. If Times New Roman has morphed into Times Uncertain, can we ever look at letterforms the same way again? Can typography remain invisible, or is it a double-edged sword, capable of media manipulation and their hollow gestures of empathy and connectedness? Will we become more critical consumers of the characters and the faces that translate and encode the COVID-19 experience? What magical type stories will coronaennials tell about their pandemic response? And how will you remember the volatility, the uncertainty, the complexity, and the ambiguity of these foreign times? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sydney. I'm absolutely enchanted by that presentation. I just want to ask Sydney if she could just step out from the podium for a moment, just to note that she is dressed in COVID colours. I think, yes, indeed, yes, indeed. So we have a few minutes for questions. Ed here will pass the mic around, and Sydney will probably need to use his mic. So if there are any questions or any comments, observations, it would be great to hear from you. particularly those of you who have been at the forefront.
Okay. Hello, thank you for a delightful presentation. I have a comment as a person who's interested in bugs that sting and bite and transmit viruses. And that is the role of yellow and black on a lot of the communication posters around town, which usually signifies venomous. And there are also a lot of other bugs that aren't venomous but use those colours anyway, just to protect themselves.
It's a great comment. We'll send that back to the designers. I think they wanted to plug in the cultural certainties of the hazard signs and the danger warnings to grab, I mean, yellow and black are such high contrast as well. It's a great way to grab the attention of people. Some sort of physiological, if not psychic response too. Yeah, great point.
Thanks for a wonderful presentation. I really have a question about the evidence base behind the attributes we assign to fonts. Has work actually been done to show that certain fonts actually do make people feel maybe warmer and more compliant with messages, or that they resist? I mean, when we look at things, we assign, I guess, our aesthetic interpretation. That has actually been validated with studies at all?
Absolutely. There's a whole string in design research all about the affective nature of fonts that helps inform designers who might just think about a font they want to design, but if they're really linked into how they want to use the font for a particular consumer market, they will tap on that research. And you just have to look at horror films and the titling in horror films, which combine the infrasound of those, you know, with the fonts that they use. And you can see right away that the fonts themselves in their cultural context actually communicate really powerfully in those instances. So yes, heaps of evidence.
I just found your talk just absolutely terrific, and I just loved every minute of it, and I'd love to read it as well if it ever becomes, you know, publishable in that form. I was just really curious about the ideas of a font for the Anthropocene age. If you are wanting to counter Anthropocene messages, so a non-Anthropocene font, what would that look like? And surely inventive people have thought about that.
I guess the question becomes then, what kind of feeling, what kind of beingness do you invest in a thing like a font? And what kind of power then does that have to have a life of its own? It's not dependent upon the human to actually then trigger, you know, some sort of affective response. So, you know, if we were thinking of those fonts that over time, the classic fonts that have sort of distilled down today to be exemplary fonts for humanity, and I'm thinking of the classic serifs like Times, like Garamond, Plantin, all of those, are those fonts that will withstand the test of the Anthropocene, or are there other ones out there?
With their thousands of, you know, years of history, and so it would be very innately or inherently sort of contradictory, the idea of a typeface which is dependent on human contact but rejects the idea that humanity is all there is and wants to embrace more than just humanity.
I'm working on a project with a Māori font designer, and what we're thinking about is tapping into not only traditions of print inscriptional forms of te reo that have been part of the culture pre-missionaries, but also thinking about orality, thinking about performance, thinking about how the body itself can be implicated in the communication message. Can that translate into a font? And is that something that's exemplifying a culture where obviously the thingness of the world, the holistic, the seamlessness of the nature-culture relationship in Te Ao Māori means that we might get something closer than just the urgency of an anthropogenic or anthropocentric view. So I haven't found any particular fonts, but I'll definitely keep my eyes open to see whether it is actually possible. I suggest you look at Trumpface, the newest font that has put New Zealand on the map from a font design company that, yes, it's rather choice.
That was wonderfully presented, and it was just like listening to a bedtime story almost, so thank you. So my question is around the change to a digital era. So fonts, obviously in the old days, weren't made on a computer, I'm guessing. Somebody would have designed them by hand. And so I remember when I was a child creating my handwriting and developing it so that it represented me. Do you think that's going to be lost in this era of children not really handwriting and more typing, that creativity?
Yeah, the solution they have is an outrageous number of fonts that you could select from, but they're not embodied, they're not originating from you as an individual. That being said, touch screens, styluses, and all the kinds of intermediated tech to the digital are actually enabling people to have some sort of personal relationship with the screen. I don't take my screen to bed, but hey. So those questions are really important, because are we living a default world where it's someone else's decisions that are shaping our identity? Or are we in control of that ourselves? So a really good point. Wherever you can, get kids to paint and to write and to, you know, use their body as, and all parts of their body as a way of communicating who they are. Because if they're just a little iPad or a cell phone, it's not going to go anywhere.
Sorry, and I just wanted to make a comment about the Times Uncertain font, that it looks like the old newspaper clippings of, you know, like, you know, when you get a threatening letter, the anonymous letter.
Yeah.
It looks like that.
Nice,
Very
nice,
unstable.
nice.
Yeah.
Clip out the letters and yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Sydney. It's been such a pleasure to have you with us today, and ask you all again to share with me, and thank you.